Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe smarter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
The genome was ugly. That was the first thing Professor Dale thought when he pulled it up on the display. Not ugly in a harmful way, just messy, cluttered, like someone had handed a child a clean blueprint and let them scribble all over it. He had taught xenobiology for 31 years. He had shown students the genomes of more than 200 species. The Sorvian genome was a model of precision, tight, efficient, almost elegant. The Venari sequence was long but clean, like a river that knew where it was going. Even the Kovari genome, ancient and dense, had a kind of slow logic to it. Human DNA looked like it had survived a war, which in a sense Professor Dale was about to explain. It had. The lecture hall held 43 students that morning. Most were Venari, their translucent skin catching the pale overhead light. A few Sorvians sat near the front, for arms folded neatly, stylus already moving. There were two humans. One was asleep. The other was Ren Adler, sitting in the third row from the back, one knee pulled up, watching the screen the way someone watches a fire. Not casually, but with real attention. Dale began the way he always began this particular slide. This is the human genome, Homo sapiens, native to the third planet of a single star system in a mid-density spiral arm. The species is approximately 300,000 years old in its current anatomical form, though the genetic line extends considerably further back. They achieved basic spaceflight roughly 400 years ago and have been integrated into galactic society for just under 2 centuries. He clicked forward. For context, the human genome contains approximately 3 billion base pairs. It is not the largest we have cataloged. That distinction belongs to the even lung plant, but it is notably disorganized for a species of this developmental stage. A significant portion of it does not appear to code for any protein at all. A Venari student near the front raised a thin hand. Is that normal for their evolutionary branch? It is not unusual for complex multicellular species, Dale said. What is somewhat unusual is the composition of the non-coding regions. We will get to that. He moved through the next several slides at a steady pace. Standard biology, chromosomal structure, gene density, a brief note on human mutation rates, slightly elevated compared to galactic average, a product of their high radiation home environment and relatively short generational cycles. The students copied notes. The sleeping human did not stir. Then Dale reached the slide he always found mildly interesting, even after all these years. Approximately 8% of the human genome consists of sequences classified as endogenous retroviruses. These are remnants of ancient viral infections that were incorporated into the host genome over millions of years. They're not active viruses. They do not replicate. They sit in the genome as a kind of biological record, markers of every pathogen that once infected an ancestral human population and failed to fully eliminate it. He clicked to the next slide. Ren Adler raised her hand. Dale nodded at her. You labeled that 8% as endogenous retroviruses, she said. Her voice was even, not challenging, just precise. Can you explain how they got there? Ancient retroviral infections, Dale said. A retrovirus inserts its genetic code into the host cell's DNA during infection. In most cases, this insertion occurs in somatic cells and is lost when the individual dies. But occasionally, the insertion occurs in a germline cell, a reproductive cell, and is passed to the next generation. Over enough generations, the sequence becomes a permanent part of the species' genome. Ren nodded slowly. So that 8%, she said, those are viruses we survived, and then we kept them. That is one way to frame it, Dale said. Is there a more accurate way? Dale considered. No, he admitted. That is essentially correct. He moved to the next slide. Ren did not look away from the previous one. Sova, the Venari student sitting beside her, leaned over slightly. Sova had sat next to Ren for most of the semester, drawn in by the human's habit of asking questions that seemed obvious and turned out not to be. Sova watched Ren's face now and recognized the expression. The same one Ren wore when she was not finished with something. You are still thinking about it, Sova said quietly. Yes, Ren said. What are you thinking? Ren did not answer immediately. She looked at the number on the slide Dale had moved past. 8%. She thought about what that meant in real terms. Not philosophically. Literally. 3 billion base pairs. 8% of 3 billion. 240 million base pairs of genetic code that had originally belonged to something that tried to kill her ancestors. And the ancestors had lived. And their children had lived. And somewhere in that process, the body had looked at the invader's code and found it useful. I want to know what it does now, Ren said. That 8%. I want to know if any of it does anything. Sova blinked. Does it matter if it does? Ren looked at her. If your body took something that attacked you and turned it into part of how you work, she said, then yes. I think that matters. At the front of the hall, Professor Dale had moved on to the Venari genome, which was clean and logical and easy to explain. He did not notice that Ren Adler had opened a secondary screen and was already searching. She did not look surprised by what she found. She looked like she had expected it. Sova had a habit of arriving early to things that IT was a Venari quality. Their species planned, prepared, and positioned themselves before events unfolded rather than reacting to them afterward. It was considered a mark of intelligence among their kind. Sova had never thought much about it until Ren Adler came along and demonstrated that sometimes the most important things happen to people who simply stay in the room after everyone else has left. The afternoon following Dale's lecture, Ren had messaged Sova with 4 words, "Come to the lab." Not the research lab, the small study room on the 2nd floor that students could book for private work sessions. Ren had booked it for 3 hours. When Sova arrived, Ren already had 2 screens open and a handwritten list of terms on a piece of actual paper, which Sova found quietly fascinating. Humans still use paper sometimes. No other species did. Sit down, Ren said. I want to show you something. Sova Saturday Ren turned one of the screens so they could both see it. On it was a detailed map of the human genome, the same cluttered image from Dale's lecture, but annotated now, with specific segments highlighted in different colors. I spent the last 2 hours going through the research on human endogenous retroviruses, Ren said. There are papers going back over 300 years, some written by humans. Most, more recently, written by xenobiologists from other species who found the data interesting. What did you find? Sova asked. Ren pointed to a highlighted region on the screen. This sequence is called ERVW1. It is a human endogenous retroviral element. It came from an ancient viral infection that entered the human germline tens of millions of years ago. It should be junk. It should do nothing. It should just sit there as a fossil record of something that once attacked a pre-human primate. But it does not do nothing, Sova said. It was not a question. She could see from Ren's face that this was the point. No, Ren said. It produces a protein called syncytin, and syncytin is essential to the formation of the placenta. Without it, placental mammals, including humans, cannot develop the structure that allows a mother to carry a fetus to full term. Sova was quiet for a moment. The virus that attacked them, Sova said slowly. Its code is now part of how they are born. Part of how we are born, Ren said. Yes. She moved to a second highlighted region. This one regulates gene expression in the early embryo. This 1 inch, she pointed to a third, has been linked to immune system modulation. Some researchers believe endogenous retroviral sequences played a role in shaping human brain development, though that is still being studied. Sova leaned forward. She had good scientific instincts. That was why she was at the institute. And her instincts were now telling her that the data on the screen was not a curiosity. It was something larger, and she was only beginning to see the shape of it. How many of these sequences are there? She asked. Roughly 98,000 identified insertions, Ren said, across the whole genome. Sova sat back. 98,000. Each one a record of an ancient viral attack. Each one integrated, absorbed, and in some cases repurposed into something the human body now depended on. The placenta, the immune system, early brain development, the very machinery of human reproduction, built in part from the wreckage of things that had tried to stop them. Ren, Sova said, does Professor Dale know all of this? He knows some of it. Ren said. The basic data is in his lecture notes, but I do not think he has sat with what it means. He called it junk DNA. He moved on in about 40 seconds. And you did not move on? No. Sova looked at the screen for a long moment. She thought about her own genome, which she had studied in her third year at the Institute. Then our DNA was stable, clean, and highly conserved. Her species had evolved in a low-pathogen orbital environment, protected from most of the viral pressure that surface-dwelling species experienced. Their genome was precise and mostly unchanged for the last 8 million years. IT had never been attacked the way human DNA had been attacked. IT had never needed to adapt the way human DNA had adapted. I want to understand something, Sova said. When your body incorporated these viral sequences, it did not choose to. It was not a decision. The virus simply infected the germline and the code stayed. Correct, Ren said. So the body did not fight the virus and win. The virus entered. The virus stayed. But the body found a way to use it. Over millions of years, yes. Natural selection kept the insertions that happened to be useful and did not actively harm reproduction. The rest stayed as silent code. Sova thought about this for a long time. That is a strange kind of strength, she finally said. You did not defeat these things. You absorbed them. Ren looked at the screen. We absorbed them, she said, because we did not have the option of being clean. Earth does not give you that option. Things attack you. You either die or you keep going. And if you keep going long enough, sometimes the attack becomes part of you. Sova did not respond immediately. Outside the small study room, the corridor filled briefly with students changing classes and then went quiet again. You should show this to Professor Dale, Sova said. Ren had already written the formal follow-up request. She submitted it that evening. Dale read it the same night. He sat with it for a long time before replying that he said yes. Counselor Orov had not planned to walk past Lecture Hall 7 that afternoon, that he had been taking a longer route back from the administrative wing because the shorter corridor was being repaired, and the repair noise bothered the sensitive membranes along the sides of his neck that his species used for secondary hearing. It was a small inconvenience. He was a patient being. He had been a Galactic Council observer for 19 years and had learned that small inconveniences often led to interesting places. He heard a human voice through the open door and slowed. This was not unusual on its own. The Institute had human students. What slowed him was the tone. Not excited, not emotional, just steady and clear, the way someone sounds when they're explaining something they've thought about carefully and have no doubt about. That he stopped in the doorway. The human student, young, female, dark-haired, was standing at the front of the lecture hall beside Professor Dale, who had given her the floor. The other students were watching with a focused stillness that meant they were genuinely listening and not simply being polite. Orov listened too. He stayed for 11 minutes. He did not intend to. When the student said, natural selection kept the insertions that were useful. The rest stayed as silent code, a record of every attack the body survived. Orov felt something shift in the back of his mind. The feeling was not alarm. It was closer to the sensation of realizing you have been reading a document in the wrong language and someone has just handed you the correct translation. He left before the lecture ended. He walked directly to his office and sat down and pulled up the Galactic Council's active file on Earth. He had read parts of it before, years ago, during his orientation to the Institute. It was not a file he had thought much about since. Earth was a Category 3 developing world, spacefaring, integrated, no active conflict, low political complexity. The biological risk assessment, last updated 62 years ago, rated the species as moderate in physical adaptability and low in pathogenic resistance. Low in pathogenic resistance. Orov read that line 3 times. Then he flagged the file and sent a short message to Rector Bond with 2 words, "Please review." Bond called him in the next morning. Rector Bond was old, even by Kovari standards. His species lived long and moved slowly and thought carefully, and the combination had made him one of the most respected educators in the Galactic Institute system. His office was full of physical objects, books, specimens in sealed cases, a stone from each world he had visited. He collected weight, Orov had always thought. He liked things that had mass. You watched a student lecture, Bond said. when Orav had explained himself. Part of 1. Yes. And this concerned you enough to flag an Earth assessment file. It concerned me enough to suggest someone should look at the file again, Orav said carefully. The biological risk data is 62 years old. The student's presentation covered material that directly contradicts part of the low resistance classification. Bond looked at the flag on his screen. What specifically contradicts it? The assessment describes human immune systems as fragile and frequently compromised. That is accurate in the narrow sense. Humans do get sick. They get sick often and visibly, and they have a wide range of known pathogenic vulnerabilities. Orav paused. What the assessment does not account for is the recovery architecture, the immune memory, the genomic integration of past infections. The species has been under continuous heavy pathogenic pressure for its entire evolutionary history, and it has not been reduced by it. It has been, I am not sure of the correct term. Hardened, Bond said. Yes, hardened. Orav nodded. The assessment reads the frequent illness as weakness. The student's data suggests it should be read as evidence of an extremely active and ongoing adaptation process. Bond was quiet for a moment. He looked at the stone on the edge of his desk, a gray-green piece of basalt from a world Orav did not know the name of. Do we have a xenobiologist on record for Earth? Bond asked. There is a Dr. Neild listed as the Institute's Human Biological Sciences consultant. I do not believe he's been contacted in several years. Contact him today, Bond said. I want a full briefing. In person if possible, remote if not. Orav stood to leave. Counselor, Bond said. Orav stopped. The student. What is her name? Ren Adler. Second year. Biological Sciences track. Bond made a note. How old is she? 24, I believe. Bond looked at the note for a moment and then set down his stylus. And she simply asked a question in a lecture and followed up on it herself. Yes. No one assigned her this. No research prompt. No academic directive. No. She asked why something was the way it was, and then she went and found out. Bond was quiet again. Outside his office window, the Institute's central courtyard was bright with early light. Students crossing between buildings, backpacks and cases, and the quiet ordinary motion of a learning institution at the start of another day. Contact Neild, Bond said, and leave the Earth file open on my screen. Orav left. Bond looked at the file for a long time before he opened it. When he did, the first line under biological risk assessment still read, low, fragile immune profile, limited resistance to novel pathogens. That he read it, and then he read the student's data summary that Orav had attached, and then he sat very still in the way his species did when they were deciding something important. He did not close the file. Dr. Neild had a voice like a person who had spent most of his life explaining things to people who were not sure they wanted to hear them. That he was 67 years old, and he had dedicated 30 of those years to the study of Earth's biosphere and the human body specifically. He had written 14 papers and one full academic text on human biological resilience. The text had been well reviewed in human scientific circles and largely ignored by galactic academic institutions, because human biology was considered a narrow specialty with limited broader relevance. That he had learned to live with that. When Rector Bond's office contacted him and requested a full briefing, he said yes before they finished the sentence. He joined remotely the following afternoon. Bond had gathered a small audience. Orav, 3 senior faculty members, and Professor Dale, who had asked to attend and been allowed. Ren Adler had not been invited, which Neild thought was a pity, but he understood the instinct to separate the student from the institutional response. He opened with something that was not on any of their screens. Before I talk about the genome, he said, I want to talk about the planet. Bond gestured for him to continue. Earth is what we classify as a high-volatility biosphere, Neild said. That means the ecological systems are complex, densely interconnected, and in constant competition. The planet's bacteria exchange genetic material horizontally, meaning across species lines, at rates we rarely see on other inhabited worlds. Its fungi grow through soil and break down almost any organic material. Its oceans contain more viral particles than any other medium we have cataloged anywhere. He paused to let that settle. The surface is not hostile in the way a high-radiation world or a toxic atmosphere world is hostile. It does not try to kill you with chemistry or physics. It tries to kill you with biology. Constantly. In ways that adapt and change and find new angles. And standing at the top of that system is a species that has never once, in its entire evolutionary history, been given a break from it. One of the faculty members, a Sorvian named Dale, knew only as Dr. Ress, leaned forward. Most species on high-pressure worlds develop extreme immune systems early. Very specific, very powerful. The Drenithi, for example, produce antimicrobial compounds from their skin continuously. Yes, Neild said. That is one strategy. Specialized fixed defenses, highly effective against the specific threats they evolved against. Less effective against novelty. He looked at his notes. Human immune systems are different. They are adaptive. They learn. When the body encounters a new pathogen, the immune system generates a response, records it, and improves for next time. This is standard knowledge. What is less discussed is how deeply that principle runs. He brought up a timeline. In recorded human history alone, roughly 5,000 years, humans have survived the following. Bubonic plague, which in a single outbreak killed between 30 and 60% of the entire European population. Smallpox, which is estimated to have killed 300 million people in the 20th century alone before humans eradicated it. Influenza in 1918, which killed 50 million people in under 2 years. HIV, cholera, typhus, polio. He looked up. Every time, the species rebuilt. Every time, the survivors passed on what they had learned, both culturally and biologically. The room was very quiet, and that does not include prehistory, Neild continued. The endogenous retroviral record in the human genome is evidence of pathogenic pressure going back 500 million years through the evolutionary line. Every one of those 98,000 insertions represents an ancient infection that entered the germline and stayed. The ones that remained are the ones that did not prevent reproduction. Many of them, as you have now seen, were repurposed. Dr. Ress asked carefully, when you say repurposed, the body used the viral code. Placental formation. Immune regulation. Possibly neurological development. The evidence is not fully mapped, but what we have is consistent. The human genome contains functional sequences that were originally hostile code from ancient pathogens. The body did not eliminate them. It incorporated them and put them to work. Bond spoke for the first time since Neild had started. How does this relate to the current biological risk classification? Neild looked at Bond directly through the screen. The current classification reads humans as having a fragile immune profile and limited resistance to novel pathogens. That reading is based on the observable fact that humans get sick frequently and sometimes badly. He paused, but that is the wrong data point. The question is not how often humans get sick. The question is what happens after. He let that sit for a moment. What happens after is that they recover. And the ones that do not recover, their deaths apply selection pressure to the next generation. And the next generation is slightly more resistant. This is not a fast process. It runs across thousands of years. But Earth is old, and the human line is old, and the process has been running for a very long time. Orov said quietly. The assessment reads the illness as the whole story. Yes, Neild said. It sees the damage and stops. It does not see what the damage produces. Dale had not spoken since the briefing began. He spoke now. In my lecture, he said slowly, I call the endogenous retroviral sequences junk DNA. Many researchers have, Neild said, not unkindly. I moved past the slide in approximately 40 seconds. I know. I have reviewed your lecture notes. Neild looked at him with something that was not quite criticism and not quite sympathy. You were not wrong about the data. You were just finished with it before the data was finished with you. Dale had nothing to say to that. Outside the window of Bond's office, evening was coming in from the west side of campus. The courtyard lights were beginning to glow. Bond closed his notes. Dr. Neild, he said, if you were writing the Earth Biological Risk Assessment today, what would it say? Neild was quiet for only a moment. It would say, Do not measure this species by what hurts them. Measure them by what they become afterward. The thing about Counselor Orov was that he was good at his job precisely because he did not panic. He had spent 19 years representing the Galactic Council at various educational institutions, monitoring integration compliance, attending academic events, and writing quarterly reports that the Council received and acknowledged and mostly filed away without acting on. He understood that his role was observational. He was not supposed to create situations. He was supposed to describe them, but description, he was beginning to understand, required accuracy. And accuracy required confronting the fact that the Council's file on Earth was not accurate. He found Ren Adler 3 days after Neil's briefing, in a small garden on the east side of campus, where students sometimes ate or read between classes. She was sitting alone on a low stone bench with a tablet, not reading, just thinking, one hand resting open on her knee, that he asked if he could sit. She said yes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. A warm wind moved through the garden. Somewhere above them, a pair of Venari students crossed the upper walkway, talking quietly. "I want to ask you something," Orov said, "and I want to be direct about why I am asking." "All right," Ren said. "When you asked your question in Professor Dale's lecture, did you know what it would lead to?" Ren looked at him. "What did it lead to?" "Rector Bond has submitted a formal inquiry to the Galactic Council's Biological Sciences Committee requesting a full review of Earth's classification. Dr. Neild has been brought in. 3 senior faculty members are now co-authoring a supplementary paper on human endogenous retroviral function." "Your question," Orov paused, moved things. Ren was quiet for a moment. "I asked the question because it was the obvious question," she said. "The data was right there on the screen. Dale labeled it, moved past it in 40 seconds, and called it junk. I want to know if it was actually junk. And you went and found out." "Yes, by yourself, without being assigned to." "It did not feel like research," Ren said. "It felt like following a thread." Orov studied her. She was not performing modesty. She was simply being precise, the way she was precise about everything, the way she had been precise when she said, "Those are viruses we survived," and then we kept them and said it like it was the most ordinary fact in the world. "You understand," Orov said carefully, "that the Council's classification of Earth has real consequences. It affects resource allocation, diplomatic priority, integration support, the speed at which humans are considered for positions in joint scientific programs." "I assumed something like that," Ren said. "The classification has been wrong for 62 years. Probably longer," Ren said. "I imagine the data existed before that. The research on endogenous retrovirals goes back much further. Someone just did not look at it from the right angle." Orov folded his hands. "The difficult part," he said, "is that the Council does not easily reverse classifications. There's a process. It requires a formal case, peer-reviewed data, a panel review. It takes time." Ren looked at him. "How much time?" "Years, typically. Sometimes many years." She nodded slowly. She did not look angry. She looked like someone storing information. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "When you walked past that lecture hall and heard me talking, what made you stop?" "You must hear student lectures all the time." Or have thought about how to answer that honestly. "You sounded certain," he said. "Not aggressive. Not trying to argue. Just certain, the way a person sounds when they're describing something they have looked at carefully and are confident of. That is not a common sound." Ren almost smiled. "Where I come from, it is." Or have looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Earth schools teach you to ask questions," she said. "Not as a formal method. Just as a habit. You see data, you ask what it means. You see a label, you ask if the label is right. You see something called junk, and you ask if anyone has actually checked." She paused. "It is not special. Every human I know does something like it." Orv sat with that for a moment, that he thought about the Council file. He thought about 62 years of low risk, fragile immune, low priority. He thought about the researchers who had written those words, looking at humans catching colds and fevers and stomach illnesses, and thinking, weak, without ever asking what happened next, without ever following the thread. "There are humans in galactic scientific positions," he said. "Not many, but some. They have been asking questions like yours for years in various fields. I wonder how many of those questions have moved things quietly, without anyone tracing it back to a single moment in a lecture hall. Rin picked up her tablet. Probably a lot, she said simply. Orav stood to leave. Counselor, Rin said. He stopped. The review panel, she said. When it convenes, can the supplementary data from Neil be included in the formal submission? Yes, Orav said. I intend to make sure it is. Rin nodded. She looked back at her tablet. Orav walked back toward the administrative wing. The long way again, past Lecture Hall 7. Because the other corridor was still being repaired, he stopped in the doorway of the hall for a moment. It was empty now. The screen at the front was dark, but he could picture it clearly. The messy, scarred, war-survived human genome filling the display, and a young woman in the third row from the back raising her hand and asking the question that had been waiting in the data for 6 decades. He pulled out his own tablet and began drafting his report to the council. He did not use the word fragile anywhere in it. 3 weeks after the question was asked, the lecture hall was empty again. IT was late. The institute was quiet in the way large buildings go quiet at night. Not silent, but settled, all its noise pulled inward. The lights in the hall had dimmed to standby level. The display at the front was off. Ren had a key card that gave her access to most academic spaces during off hours. Postgraduate research access granted at the start of the year, used by her mostly for the library. She used it now for this. She sat in the same seat she had sat in on the day of Dale's lecture. Third row from the back, slightly left of center. She pulled up the genome display on her personal tablet and cast it to the main screen. The human genome appeared again, messy and dense and full of noise. She had looked at it so many times in the past 3 weeks that she knew parts of it almost by memory. The ERV regions, the regulatory sequences, the silent code that had once been an attack and was now just part of the structure, part of what she was made of. She heard the door open and did not turn around. She knew it was Sova before Sova spoke, because Sova's footsteps had a specific lightness that Ren had learned over many months of sitting beside her in various rooms. Sova sat in the seat next to her. She looked at the display. She did not say anything for a while. Bond told me, Sova said finally, about the council review, about the formal submission. Orav told me it would take time, Ren said. Years, possibly. Yes. Sova studied the image on the screen. She had spent the last 3 weeks doing her own reading, pulling papers on human biology that she had never thought to look at before. She had found things that surprised her. She had found things that unsettled her in a way she was still working through. I looked at my own genome data, she said. For comparison, Ren looked at her. Then our DNA is 98.3% conserved, Sova said, meaning it has barely changed in millions of years. Low mutation rate, low external pressure. We evolve in a stable orbital environment, mostly protected from surface-level pathogens. Our immune systems are good at the specific things we evolved against, and not particularly flexible beyond that. That is not a flaw, Ren said. It is just a different history. I know, Sova said, but I was thinking, our genome looks clean because nothing has attacked it badly enough to leave a mark. Yours looks the way it does because everything attacked it and it survived anyway. She paused. I think I've been reading the word clean incorrectly. I thought it meant healthy. I think it actually means untested. Ren did not respond immediately. She looked at the display. 98,000 insertions. Each one a marker. Each one a record of something that had entered the human line and failed to end it. I do not feel like a survivor, she said. I feel like a person who goes to school and asks questions and goes home and eats bad food sometimes. I do not feel like the product of 500 million years of biological war. You do not have to feel like it, Sova said. The genome says it for you. Ren almost laughed. That is a strange thought. Most true things are. They sat in silence for a while. The display glowed softly in the dim hall. Outside, the campus was dark and still and very far away, in a building that Ren had never seen and a committee room that she did not know the name of. A file that had been sitting undisturbed for 62 years was sitting open on a desk in front of people who were only just beginning to understand what they had been looking at. She had not done this to change anything. That was the truth of it. She had asked because the data was there and the question was obvious and no one was asking it. She had followed it because following things was what she did. She had not set out to move anything, but things had moved anyway. Do you think it will matter? Sova asked. The review. The reclassification. I think the data matters, Ren said. The classification is just an official way of admitting what the data already says. And if it takes years, then it takes years. Ren looked at the screen. The data will still be true. Sova nodded slowly. She looked at the genome image for a long time. She thought about all the humans she had met at the Institute over the past 2 years. The ones in her classes, in the library, in the shared labs. She thought about how none of them had seemed like living archives of 500 million years of survival. They had seemed like students. Tired sometimes. Funny often. Occasionally brilliant. Occasionally ordinary. All of them carrying 98,000 reasons. None of them knowing it the way the data knew it. Ren, she said. Yes. Thank you for asking. Ren turned off the display. The hall went dark. Someone was going to, she said. It was just there. Someone was always going to ask. She was right about that. But someone had to be first. Far away, the committee room file was still open. A reviewer had reached the section on endogenous retroviral integration. She had read it twice now. She reached for her comms panel and opened a channel to the panel coordinator. Convene the full review, she said. Not the standard process. Full panel. Priority track. The coordinator asked why. The reviewer looked at the data on her screen. The messy, scarred, impossible genome of a species that had been quietly labeled low risk and set aside for 62 years. Because, she said, someone finally asked the right question. She did not know the name of the student who had asked it. She would find out eventually. Everyone would. But the question had already done what questions do when they are the right ones. It had moved quiet and certain and unstoppable from one person's mouth into the world, and the world was now a slightly different shape because of it.